enigmatic, Sphinx-like, cold and authoritarian. These are all words which have been variously used to describe the gray fox, as Howard Hawks was known. In his films, however, he often portrayed intense and deep relationships between men, and he lived out similar male bonds with many of his stars. His relationship with women was much more complex and uncertain, but he was far from a chauvinist, being perhaps the first director in cinema history to write female characters with assertive and stereotypically masculine personalities. He even oversaw the first, and some say only, example of a female buddy movie, starring Marilyn Monroe and Jane Russell. So how much can we peel back from this inscrutable, mysterious figure, who was once described as the greatest American artist of all time? Let's get deep into the life of Howard Hawks. Welcome to Hollywood Mysteries. Howard Hawks was born into wealth and privilege in 1896 in Goshen, Indiana. He grew up pampered and spoiled, especially by his maternal grandfather. His early life was one of luxury, where he spent his time racing cars and flying planes, rather than concentrating on schoolwork. He did prestigious schools like the Throop Polytechnic Institute, later known as Caltech. However, despite being a mediocre student, Hawks's family's social standing paved his way into Phillips Exeter Academy and later Cornell University, but he struggled academically in both places. The tragic death of his sister in 1911 preceded a move to a more rural setting in Glendora. His parents could not bear to be in the house where one of their children had passed away. Hawks now showed more interest in gambling and liquor than in his studies, but his passion for auto racing introduced him to the director Victor Fleming. The way Hawks remembered it was that, in his words, he just wanted a job during summer vacation. Somebody I knew at Paramount got me one in the prop room. That someone was Victor Fleming, a protege of Dwan. He started in the props department at Paramount, and his knack for problem solving got him noticed by major figures like Alan Dwan and Cecil B. DeMille. When the United States entered World War I, Hawks's academic and cinematic pursuits were cut short as he signed up for military service. He became a flying instructor, but to his frustration, he saw no action due to the war ending before he could be deployed. Post-war, Hawks was determined to make his mark in Hollywood, not behind the scenes in the props department, but as a director. His financial resources allowed him to provide a loan for the struggling Jack Warner. A grateful Warner gave Hawks a directorial role in some one-reel comedies. This then led to his first real directing opportunity, with The Road to Glory in 1926. The film was a case of the young director writing what he knew, a wild melodrama about auto racing. He went on to have a couple more hits with Fig Leaves, a comedy, and Paid to Love. The latter was heavily influenced by F.W. Murnau's German expressionist style. Hawks said of it later, "It wasn't my type of stuff. At least I got it over in a hurry. You know, the idea of wanting the camera to do those things. Now the camera is somebody's eyes." A Girl in Every Port, released in 1928, it was a film where Hawks first found his style. He established themes and character archetypes that he would later explore throughout his career. The casting of Louise Brooks as the independent Marie demonstrated Hawks' preference for strong and unconventional female leads. He said of Brooks, "I hired Louise Brooks because she was very sure of herself. She's very analytical, she's very feminine, but she's damn good, and sure she's going to do what she wants to do. She was way ahead of her time with that hairdress. And she's a rebel. I like her. You know, I like rebels." On May 30th, 1928, Hawks tied the knot with Athole Shearer, a Canadian-American actress. She was also the sister to the famous movie star Norma Shearer and MGM sound engineer Douglas Shearer. Athole's film career in the eastern United States was limited to minor, uncredited roles in just 3 movies. Once in California, Athole's acting pursuits came to a halt. She would never reach the heights of her sister Norma's success at MGM. A major obstacle in her acting journey was her ongoing health issues, particularly her yet undiagnosed battle with bipolar disorder. This situation, alongside the challenges it brought, ruined her acting career. And if she ever thought that the Sphinx-like Hawks was going to be a pillar of support, she would be gravely mistaken. The Air Circus was Hawks' first film about aviation. By 1928, Charles Lindbergh had become a huge international celebrity, and Wings was one of the year's blockbuster films. Eager to tap into the nation's fascination with aviation, Fox acquired Hawks' original screenplay for the Air Circus. This movie spun a new tale on the Hawksian buddy story. Seen in A Girl in Every Port, filming took place from April to June 1928. Once again, Hawks' career-long obsession with so-called love stories between two men was evident. These love stories were, naturally given the era, not romantic. Rather, they were about men bonding over some sense of duty and other masculine ideals. More often than not, this was done in defiance of some female character, who were usually also of a masculine type. The film hit the screens in September 1928. It enjoyed moderate success, though it's now considered a lost film. Trent's Last Case was Hawks' take on the 1913 detective novel by British writer E.C. Bentley. Hawks admired the book, calling it one of the greatest detective stories ever, and was keen on adapting it into his first sound film. He chose Raymond Griffith for the lead role of Philip Trent, despite Griffith's whispery voice. This disability was a result of poison gas exposure during World War I. Hawks believed Griffith's unique voice would in fact be an asset in sound films. However, after only a few scenes had been filmed, Fox halted production, insisting on a silent adaptation due to Griffith's voice and legal constraints. The film, featuring a musical score and sound effects but no dialogue, never saw a U.S. release, and was poorly received during its brief showing in England. Though lost until the mid-1970s, it was finally screened in the U.S. at a Hawks retrospective in 1974, an event Hawks attended and where he unsuccessfully sought to destroy the only existing copy. Hawks' agreement with Fox concluded on bad terms in May 1929, and this was the end of his long-term commitments to any major film studio. By 1930, the film industry was in turmoil due to the transition to sound films, or talkies, leading to the downfall of many actors and directors. Studios were on the lookout for stage talent they believed to be more adaptable to the demands of sound films. Despite having 14 years of experience and a track record of box office hits, Hawks found himself in a position where he had to demonstrate his value to the studios all over again. His departure from Fox under less than amicable terms certainly didn't help his standing, but Hawks was no stranger to standing his ground in disputes with studio executives. After a period of fruitless negotiation, he managed to rejuvenate his career in 1930 with his debut sound film. The Dawn Patrol revolved around a group of British pilots assigned with high-risk bombing missions over Germany. The crew's manly camaraderie and heavy drinking helped them cope with the constant danger. Hawks, an inveterate fantasist and self-promoter, alleged that he originated the story. He claimed he paid John Monk Saunders to be credited as the writer, supposedly to mask Hawks' own inexperience with screenwriting, but this could just as easily be an embellishment of the truth, as was so much Hawks said about himself. Filming kicked off in late February 1930, coinciding with Howard Hughes wrapping up his own World War I aviation blockbuster, Hell's Angels. Hughes' movie had been in the works since September 1927 and was a vast production. In a cunning move, Hawks immediately began recruiting aviation specialists and cameramen who had worked for Hughes, including Elmer Dyer, Harry Reynolds, and Ira Reid. Hughes, upon discovering his talents were being poached for a competing project, attempted to undermine the Dawn Patrol via all available means. He went as far as to employ a spy, who was swiftly apprehended and initiated a copyright lawsuit against First National, the studio behind Hawks' film. However, by late 1930, Hughes dropped the lawsuit, having forged a friendship with Hawks amidst a legal battle. Hawks later boasted, again possibly embellishing the truth, that Hughes called off the lawsuit after a friendly golf match which Hawks won, with a score of 71 against Hughes' 72. The film made its debut in July, smashing the first week box office records at the Winter Garden Theater in New York. It quickly became one of the standout successes of 1930. This triumph solidified Hawks' reputation in the filmmaking world. For Hawks, the joy of creating his next movie, The Criminal Code, was largely due to his collaboration with Walter Huston, whom he regarded as the greatest actor I ever worked with. Constance Cummings, who landed the role of his daughter at the last minute, was equally in awe of Huston. She noted that Hawks spent a significant amount of time with Huston, which left her feeling somewhat excluded from the predominantly male cast and crew. The movie premiered in January 1931 and was well received, despite being banned in Chicago. He also had to wrangle with censorship challenges that Hawks would encounter again in his next project, but to a far greater degree. In 1930, Hawks was brought on board by Howard Hughes to direct Scarface, a gangster film inspired by the notorious Chicago crime boss Al Capone. Finished in September 1931, the film's release was stalled by the stringent censorship of the Hays Code, which took issue with its portrayal of sex, violence, ethnic stereotypes, corrupt officials, and slick risk-taking criminals. Essentially all the elements the Hays office aimed to convince the American public did not exist. The battle with the Hays office over Scarface saw Hawks and Hughes engaging in negotiations and making compromises for more than a year. The film finally hit the screens in 1932, following other landmark gangster movies like The Public Enemy and Little Caesar. It's a tantalizing thought to imagine what the original version of Scarface might have been like, before the Hays office had its way with the film's content. But even so, the final cut was a dynamic and often brilliant film that wowed audiences of the early 30s. Scarface also marked the beginning of a fruitful 20-year partnership between Hawks and screenwriter Ben Hecht, who quickly became both a close friend and collaborator. Hawks often claimed he consulted actual gangsters during the film's preparation. Those assertions, particularly the one about Capone adoring the film and possessing a personal copy, ought to be taken with a grain of salt, especially since Capone was incarcerated by the time the movie was released. More credible is Hecht's account of a visit from a couple of Capone's henchmen, who came asking about Howard Hughes' intentions with the movie. Hecht reassured them by describing Hughes as just a sucker with the money, implying they were no threat to Capone. Scarface continues to be regarded as a quintessential depiction of Chicago's gangster scene in the 1920s. It has the sharpest, most ingenious narrative of the gangster's ascent and demise. It's as exciting to watch now as it was back in 1932. Following Scarface, Hawks distanced himself from the ensuing legal troubles with the censorship board, letting Hughes deal with that nightmare. He returned to First National, this time collaborating with producer Daryl F. Zanuck. Hawks went for a film inspired once again by his childhood fascination with car racing. He co-wrote The Crowd Roars with Seton Miller, which was their 8th and last partnership. The film featured actual racers, including Billy Arnold, the 1930 Indianapolis 500 winner, and was a success upon its release. In 1932, Hawks directed Tiger Shark, featuring Edward G. Robinson as a tuna fisherman. By 1933, he had inked a deal for 3 films with MGM Studios, kicking off with Today We Live, a World War I saga based on a story by William Faulkner. Faulkner would become a collaborator on several of his films in the coming years. His next MGM projects, The Prize Fighter and The Lady, and the biographical Viva Villa, once again experienced studio meddling, prompting Hawks to exit his MGM deal prematurely. In 1934, Hawks ventured to Columbia Pictures to direct 20th Century, his first screwball comedy. It starred John Barrymore and his distant cousin Carole Lombard. The film was adapted from a play by Ben Hecht and Charles MacArthur, and released the same year as Frank Capra's It Happened One Night. It is considered a cornerstone of the screwball comedy genre. The following year, Hawks made Barbary Coast, with Edward G. Robinson and Miriam Hopkins. 1936 could have been a standout year for Howard Hawks, with several movies out, A New Child on the Horizon, and an income to match any top director in Hollywood. However, he found himself caught in a whirlwind of professional and personal strife, much of it stemming from his own stubbornness, egoism, and emotional detachment. This period showed Hawks' severe inflexibility, and also his tendency to walk away from problematic situations without regard for the impact on others. While some might admire his unwavering principles, others could interpret his actions as emotionally immature, even cold. Hawks' challenging home life drove him to immerse himself in continuous work and gambling. The news of Athole's pregnancy wasn't exactly welcome, with David, age 6, and Peter, Athole's son from a previous relationship, at 10. Hawks doubted the future of his marriage. The relationship was overshadowed by Athole's intermittent mental health issues. Despite her husband's frequent absence, she found a glimmer of hope in the prospect of another child, believing it might salvage their shaky marriage. Unbeknownst to her, Hawks was entangled in an affair with the showgirl and dancer Mary Lou Holtz. On the career front, Hawks' decision to collaborate once again with his nemesis, Sam Goldwyn, was driven by financial needs. Goldwyn's promise of a hefty $3,500 weekly paycheck was a gamble, Despite Goldwyn's reputation, he was a shrewd businessman from whom directors could hide very little. Hawks, thinking he could outmaneuver Goldwyn this time, found his efforts fruitless. Goldwyn acquired the rights to Edna Ferber's novel Come and Get It, assigning Hawks to the helm. Approaching Come and Get It with caution, Hawks was well aware of Goldwyn's overpowering influence on directors. He had significant doubts about the story's appeal and its chances for success. On May 20th, Athole welcomed their daughter Barbara into the world. Yet during that same week, Hawks was notably absent, heading for a trip to Mexico instead. His time had also been significantly occupied by his leading lady, the breathtakingly beautiful Frances Farmer. Hawks recounted that his tenure ended following an attempt to mollify his producer with some freshly written scenes. Goldwyn was impressed and inquired about the author. Hawks' admission of his own authorship led Goldwyn to an explosive reaction. He insisted on a strict division of labor between writers and directors. Hawks claimed he resigned on the spot, whereas Goldwyn maintained he had dismissed Hawks. The truth remains elusive, but according to Hawks' secretary, Maida Carpenter, Hawks simply walked off set, gathered his belongings, and left without notifying his cast or crew. Columbia Pictures, under Sam Briskin, wasted no time in reaching out to Hawks after his fallout with Goldwyn. Hawks was immediately drawn to the project, Gunga Din, an adaptation of the Rudyard Kipling novel. He was enthused by its adventurous and masculine, and therefore very Hawksian spirit. In late October, Hawks had the storyline and a portion of the script for his new project underway. To his surprise, Athole took an uncharacteristically assertive step by confronting Hawks in New York about their faltering marriage. Given Hawks' aversion to direct emotional confrontation, Athole's bold move was unlikely to yield positive results. And it didn't. She was suffering with serious mental health issues and was desperate for some comfort. Firm in his resolve that their marriage was beyond repair, Hawks coldly dismissed her shortly after her arrival. She was devastated by Hawks' indifferent response. Athole spiraled into a severe emotional crisis upon returning to Los Angeles. Following assessments at UCLA Medical Center and a misdiagnosis of schizophrenia, she was admitted to La Encina Sanitarium in Pasadena. While there, she received electric shock therapy as recommended by her doctors and signed off by Hawks. Despite the treatment, or perhaps because of it, medical professionals were not optimistic about her recovery. They warned Hawks of a likely cyclical pattern of breakdowns and temporary improvements. The severity of her condition would lead to a total disintegration of her identity. She would require the most robust forms of treatment available to them. Hawks accepted the medical advice and supported the treatment plan from afar. As Athole battled her condition, the care of their children, especially young Barbara, fell increasingly to Hawks' parents. Norma Shearer, who might have been expected to support her sister, was herself grappling with a profound crisis following her husband Irving Thalberg's recent and sudden death. Athole was essentially left alone with her demons, misdiagnosed and subjected to some of the 1930s most intimidating treatments, while her husband continued his policy of total emotional disengagement. In 1938, Howard Hawks directed the screwball comedy, Bringing Up Baby, for RKO Pictures. While Carole Lombard was considered for the role of the eccentric heiress, Katharine Hepburn was always the front-runner to play Susan. Despite Hepburn's uncertain appeal at the box office and her high salary demands, RKO's supervising producer, Pan Berman, stood firmly in support of casting her. As production progressed, the film's expenses ballooned to $1 million, a significant 40% over its already generous budget. A considerable portion of these extra costs stemmed from contractual obligations to the leading actors, which incurred penalties when the shooting schedule exceeded the original timeline. Upon its release, Bringing Up Baby did not perform well at the box office, leading RKO to part ways with Hawks due to the financial flop. Nonetheless, the film has since been recognized as one of Hawks' finest works. Its initial lack of success was attributed to factors such as its sophisticated humor, the intellectual nature of its characters, a perceived absence of genuine romance, and unusually dark lighting for a comedy. Hawks reflected on the film's shortcomings, acknowledging that its flaw was the absence of normal characters, with everyone portrayed as eccentric. He learned from this experience and vowed not to repeat such a mistake. One evening, Hawks was at the Clover Club on the Sunset Strip, a hotspot for the movie industry's elite, where he noticed Albert "Cubby" Broccoli with an unfamiliar but stunning young woman. Intrigued, Hawks asked for an introduction and met Nancy Ray Gross, known as Slim, a striking 21-year-old. Knowing about Hawks' reputation in the industry and impressed by his commanding appearance and stylish dress, Miss Gross agreed to go on a date with him. She was taken aback when the 42-year-old with gray hair introduced his 3 children and revealed he was married. Slim was shocked. Hawks's further explanation that his wife was mentally unwell and confined to a facility made Slim think about running for the door. Nevertheless, Slim decided to stay, and she and Hawks began a serious relationship. It took 3 years for Hawks to finalize his divorce from Athole, complicated by the difficulty of divorcing someone deemed mentally incompetent. However, Athole had not been legally declared insane, allowing Hawks to find a way to proceed with the divorce. During this period, Slim and Hawks were openly seen together, not hiding their relationship while they traveled and socialized extensively, despite Slim's official residence remaining with her mother. Hawks's career undeniably transitioned into a new era with the development of his relationship with Slim. This was the most prolific and innovative period of his filmmaking. During their 8-year involvement, he directed 8 films, including classics like Only Angels Have Wings and Red River, all of which enjoyed both critical acclaim and box office success. This period is often regarded as one of the most impressive stretches of artistic and commercial achievement in the history of Hollywood. Critics, especially from the 1950s and onwards, have identified Only Angels Have Wings as a particularly significant work in Hawks's oeuvre. The film's enhanced vibrancy and romanticism was evidently drawn from Hawks's newfound love for Slim. Outgoing, playful, and strong, she was everything that Athole wasn't. Ernest Hemingway also fell for Slim at first sight. He met her during Hawks's efforts to lure the celebrated author into screenwriting for Hollywood. Despite Hawks's persuasion, Hemingway resisted the idea of engaging with the studio system and its notorious creative constraints. Hawks then resumed his collaboration with Howard Hughes and started planning his dream home, eventually purchasing a stunning 105-acre plot near Victor Fleming's residence in a gently sloped canyon along Moraga Drive, off Sepulveda Boulevard in the foothills of the Santa Monica Mountains. The dissolution of Hawks's marriage to Athole came on July 24, 1940, when Athole, through her sister Norma, filed for divorce. Athole's mental health was in severe decline, misdiagnosed and improperly treated, leading her to agree to the divorce under the influence of her family and doctors. The settlement, which took over a year to finalize, resulted in Hawks paying Athole a monthly support of $1,000 and gaining full custody of their children, including Athole's son from her previous marriage, Peter. Sergeant York managed to snag 12 Academy Award nominations, despite stiff competition from Citizen Kane and John Ford's How Green Was My Valley, the latter taking the Oscars for Best Picture and Director. Hawks earned his sole Oscar nomination for this film. The movie quickly became the top film in the nation during the autumn, shattering box office records across various markets and emerging as a cultural sensation of immense scale. Additionally, it kicked off some significant political debate in the Capitol. Angered by Hollywood's perceived advocacy for the U.S. to join the war, conservative isolationists and anti-war right-wingers in the Senate initiated highly publicized hearings by an interstate commerce subcommittee. These hearings focused on what they claimed was a subtle promotion of pro-war sentiments in Hollywood films, especially those portraying Germany as a menace to American life and advocating for American support to Britain. While attacking the film industry was a surefire way to garner media attention, the rising popularity of Sergeant York led editorial writers across the country to use the movie as a means to criticize the conservative senators and bolster pro-war sentiment. They argued that the film, which depicted the moral journey of a religious pacifist towards accepting the necessity of war, offered a definitive rebuttal to the senators' complaints. The hearings quickly lost momentum, and the United States proceeded to ramp up its war preparations. Weather woes, unruly guests, and other mishaps have disrupted many weddings, but Hawks and Slim's nuptials contended with something far more historic: the attack on Pearl Harbor. Their wedding was scheduled for December 11th, amidst Hawks' career high and the looming release of Ball of Fire. Then the December 7th attack shifted the nation's focus to war. Nonetheless, Slim insisted, and their wedding proceeded as planned just 4 days later. Post-honeymoon, Hawks discovered many of his peers, including Jimmy Stewart, Daryl Zanuck, and John Ford, had already joined the military. Ironically, despite directing the pro-war smash hit, Sergeant York, Hawks now harbored doubts about the U.S. entering the war, and later expressed his suspicions that President Roosevelt might have had prior knowledge of the Pearl Harbor attack. Despite these reservations, Hawks was convinced to direct Air Force, another wartime hit. Eventually, Hawks, Slim, and their family settled into what Lauren Bacall would describe as the most beautiful house she had ever seen. According to Christian Nyby, Hawks saw Slim as his ideal woman, And whatever qualities Slim lacked, Hawks found in Bacall. In fact, it was Slim who introduced Bacall to Hawks, leading to her stellar career. With Humphrey Bogart on board, To Have and Have Not quickly moved forward. After his success in Casablanca, Warner Brothers was eager for Bogart to continue in a similar romantic lead role. This time, Hawks would be at the helm, and Bogey would be opposite the young woman who would change his life. Howard Hawks made several attempts to bring Ernest Hemingway and William Faulkner together for a meeting. Despite their status as literary titans, both authors consistently declined. This made the closest collaboration their shared credits on To Have and Have Not. Hawks, directing the film, brought Faulkner on board to adapt Hemingway's story. Despite high hopes, the film didn't meet the towering expectations some had for it. While not exactly a failure, it certainly didn't achieve the iconic status of Casablanca, a film which, by the way, Hawks wildly claimed to have given to Michael Curtis. However, the production was notable for its enjoyable and relaxed atmosphere, and the off-screen romance between stars Bogart and Bacall, which translated into major on-screen chemistry. Bacall, on her end, saw Hawks as daunting and enigmatic, feeling a mix of respect and apprehension towards him. Hawks' rapport with Bogart was unlike his friendship with other actors like Gary Cooper, Cary Grant, or John Wayne. Before the film, Hawks and Bogart were virtual strangers, with differing political views and personal interests, with Bogart not sharing Hawks' passion for motorcycles, hunting, or sports. The romance between Bogart and Bacall became apparent early in the filming process. It did not please Hawks, who had plans to turn Bacall into his devoted protege, but he pragmatically opted to leverage their chemistry for the movie's benefit. Hawks' reaction to Bacall's shift in attention towards Bogart was a complex mix of annoyance, jealousy, and hurt pride. Bacall herself admitted to feeling perpetually intimidated by Hawks. "I always was nervous around him. He was always very intimidating," she said. She knew he had a crush on her. That was his entire fantasy. Discover an actress, mold her into a star, and watch her fall in love with him. Only she just didn't see Hawks that way. He was too remote and conservative, unlike the loose cannon that was Bogart. It was Slim who had discovered Bacall, and she was watching Hawks like, well, a hawk. Bacall also observed that Hawks' affection for Slim was more about pride in her elegance and beauty, rather than a deep, passionate love. Bacall also said she never felt a sense of fun or sex between them, and was aware that Slim was fully informed of Hawks' affair with Dolores Moran, a woman who Slim mockingly referred to as dollar-ass moron. Additionally, Hawks had a brief encounter with Dorothy Davenport, a tall brunette extra who resembled Slim. In spite of the personal turmoil surrounding Hawks, the romance between Bogart and Bacall brought a thrilling excitement to the production environment. Hawks was then on the lookout for another film to cast Bogart and Bacall in, and settled on Raymond Chandler's The Big Sleep. The novel, filled with themes of pornography, nymphomania, homosexuality, police corruption, and unpunished murder, was initially seen as a censorship nightmare by Warner Brothers. This was the kind of movie that would have had Will Hayes and his recently appointed successor, Joseph Breen, reaching for the smelling salts. However, Hawks convinced Jack Warner he could craft a script that would stealthily bypass the strict scrutiny of the censors. This led Warner to greenlight the production. The Big Sleep production saw a return of the vibrant energy from the early days of To Have and Have Not, though this was something of a facade for the underlying tensions. Bacall, troubled by Bogart's tumultuous personal life and his decision to remain with his wife, experienced a resurgence of anxiety, visibly shaking during scenes requiring her to light cigarettes or pour drinks. She leaned on Hawks for support, which boosted his confidence in having regained influence over her. Despite the strain, Bogart's love for Bacall was unwavering, and he was resolute in his decision to be with her. However, he was navigating the emotional turmoil and the challenges posed by his estranged and combative wife, Mayo Metho, which led to sleepless nights and excessive drinking. The film became an opportunity for the couple to work closely again, reigniting the unmistakable chemistry between them. This, once more, played out amid the intense and bold roles they portrayed, as they wrestled with the pain of being madly in love, but kept apart. Despite the challenges Bogart faced in his personal life, Hawks held him in high esteem, placing him in every scene of the film. Hawks recognized Bogart's special appeal. He noted later that very few actors could dominate the screen so consistently without wearing out their welcome. Nonetheless, Hawks reached a breaking point with the ongoing drama between his leading actors. He summoned Bacall for a serious talk, warning her about the potential consequences of her choices, and suggesting that Bogart's lifestyle and marriage meant that their relationship was futile. He even went so far as to arrange a date for Bacall and Clark Gable, hoping to divert her affections, but to no avail, as Bogart and Bacall's relationship solidified against Hawks' expectations. Their professional ties with him soured. When it became evident the pair would marry, contradicting Hawks' predictions, he distanced himself from them. The Big Sleep debuted to great fanfare in New York City on August 23, 1946, setting a new record with an $84,000 gross in its first week, and the theater nearly operated non-stop to accommodate the overwhelming public interest. Following the success of The Big Sleep, Hawks continued his remarkable streak of hits. This gave him significant leverage at Warner Brothers. Despite this, he felt constrained by his contract and yearned for the autonomy he and Howard Hughes had during the production of Scarface. This longing led him to establish Monterey Productions to independently finance his future projects. In 1948, Hawks embarked on Red River, an ambitious western that drew comparisons to Mutiny on the Bounty, featuring John Wayne and introducing Montgomery Clift in his debut role. Around this time, Slim had it out with Hawks and demanded a separation. She was tired of playing mother to his children, who were almost the same age as her, but she had also fallen in love with Leland Hayward, a fact she declined to mention to Hawks at this time. As ever, Hawks dealt with emotional challenges by going completely silent, withdrawing and retreating into his shell. Hawks was confident that Red River was set to be a standout project, with the casting of Wayne and Clift proving to be a brilliant move. The film's grand scale had everyone convinced it would be a hit at the box office. However, Hawks was soon confronted with financial realities. Despite the anticipated success of Red River, it seemed unlikely to provide him with immediate financial relief. Facing a costly divorce from Slim, substantial government demands for back taxes, overdue alimony payments to Athole, and escalating gambling debts, Hawks realized the urgency of securing another project. Unexpectedly, Hawks received an offer from Sam Goldwyn, someone he thought he'd never collaborate with again. Goldwyn was in search of a new project for Danny Kaye, and was curious about Hawks' ideas. Consequently, in 1947, Hawks revisited his earlier work, Ball of Fire, to create A Song is Born, featuring Danny Kaye and Virginia Mayo, while retaining the original storyline. This remake shifted focus towards popular jazz music, with performances by jazz icons like Tommy Dorsey, Benny Goodman, Louis Armstrong, Lionel Hampton, and Benny Carter, playing themselves. Despite his previously intense engagement in his projects, Hawks found little interest in this film, ultimately describing it as a regrettable and altogether horrible experience. He did, however, very much enjoy modern jazz, and having this extraordinary group of jazz masters on set was a genuine pleasure. He fought against Goldwyn, who insisted the director enforce racial segregation on set. Hawks was far from a progressive politically, and made frequent insensitive jokes about his Jewish colleagues, including Bacall. But there was no way he was going to permit such draconian racism on his set, and he developed a strong friendship with Louis Armstrong in particular. Once this uninspiring shoot was done, Hawks, worn out by Goldwyn's incessant meddling, now had to return to an empty home, with Slim having moved out once and for all. He was hoping to escape the empty home, but also a gathering political storm in Hollywood. Hawks was a conservative, but he was certainly not a radical. However, most of his circle were becoming radicalized. Clark Gable, Gary Cooper, John Wayne, Victor Fleming, screenwriter Jules Furthman, and several others were pressuring Hawks to join the virulently anti-communist Motion Picture Alliance for the preservation of American ideals. Hawks refused, brushing it off by saying he didn't even know what it was. But he did know, and he was no more enthused about right-wing radicalism and blacklisting than he had been about left-wing radicalism. Hawks was also facing a monumental shift in Hollywood. Post-war American audiences were tired of the same old pictures from the same old directors. Only a select few, like Billy Wilder, Alfred Hitchcock, and Cecil B. DeMille, were able to navigate this tumultuous period while retaining the kind of producer-director autonomy that Hawks desired. Hawks decided his best bet was to go to 20th Century Fox, run by his friend Darryl F. Zanuck, who was also notably the one major studio boss not to support the Blacklist. Hawks departed from Los Angeles in mid-August and embarked on a journey from New York aboard the Queen Elizabeth on August 21st, heading to Germany to direct I Was a Male War Bride. This project reunited him with Cary Grant and introduced Anne Sheridan into the mix. During this period, Hawks was stunned to learn of Victor Fleming's passing. Fleming, still a close friend of Hawks, had experienced a major setback with his latest project, Joan of Arc, and his health deteriorated due to poor nutrition, lack of rest, and excessive drinking, exacerbated by the end of his relationship with the film's leading lady, Ingrid Bergman. Fleming's death from a heart attack came when he was believed to be around 59, although he made serious efforts to keep his exact age a mystery. In the meantime, Hawks engaged in discussions with Zanuck at Fox about potential future projects. Hawks's interest was piqued by Morning Star, a science fiction love story from the Saturday Evening Post, after Leland Hayward acquired the rights. Although this particular project didn't materialize, it fired up Hawks's fascination with science fiction, leading to The Thing from Another World, with RKO, not Fox. Hawks's new relationship with Marion Marshall saw ups and downs. After rumors of an impending marriage, Marshall clarified they weren't even engaged. However, by New Year's Eve, they announced plans to marry on the second anniversary of their first date. But just days before the scheduled date, amid speculation of trouble, the wedding was unexpectedly canceled, apparently due to Marshall's frustration over Hawks not casting her in the big roles she'd been dreaming of. The directorship of The Thing has been a topic of debate, with many attributing the film's direction to Hawks, despite Christian Nyby being credited. John Carpenter, who remade the film in the 1980s, firmly believed Hawks directed the movie, pointing out the characteristic camaraderie among male characters as a hallmark of Hawks' style. Hawks, somewhat uncharacteristically, never sought to claim credit outright, even though it was arguably deserved. After releasing The Thing in spring, Hawks shifted his focus to the big sky. He saw this film as a chance to build on Red River's success, offering another tale of Western pioneering. Despite favorable reviews, the film didn't meet its financial expectations, grossing only $1.65 million against its substantial budget. Hawks harshly critiqued himself for the film's shortcomings, taking personal responsibility for its failure. Under his RKO contract, Hawks still had commitments to 20th Century Fox, where Darryl Zanuck was eager to have him back. With financial pressures mounting, Hawks returned to work on Monkey Business, featuring his frequent collaborator Cary Grant. The comedy also involved Grant interacting with a chimpanzee, which he at least found less troublesome than the leopard in Bringing Up Baby. The cast included Marilyn Monroe, Ginger Rogers, and Charles Coburn. Charles Coburn in particular shone in his role. He drew audience attention even away from Cary Grant. One early scene in the shoot had Coburn chasing Marilyn Monroe with a soda siphon, deliberating the best part of her spectacular physique to aim for. Monroe's role in Monkey Business marked the end of her early sex symbol phase, before moving on to mega-stardom in Niagara. Her discomfort during filming was attributed by some on set because she had to wear a dress that she disliked, but it turned out to be due to appendicitis, which was treated immediately after her scenes were shot. Hawks and Grant were indifferent to Monroe's charms. Grant remarked, "I had no idea she would become a big star. If she had something different from any other actress, it wasn't apparent at the time. She seemed very shy and quiet. There was something sad about her." On that last point, Grant was certainly correct. Hawks considered Monroe deeply unfairly, so goddamn dumb, in his own words. This put Monroe ill at ease around the austere and authoritarian Hawks, but he did concede her performance was excellent. In spite of this seeming disinterest, Hawks would work with Monroe again on his next project, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. Zanuck had originally envisioned the film as a vehicle for Betty Grable, but her star was waning as much as her salary was waxing, to a hefty $150,000 a picture. Monroe, on the other hand, had been locked into a miserably underpaid deal by the William Morris Agency, meaning she was available for a mere $18,000. Still considered largely unproven in spite of her blistering rise in popularity, Zanuck paired her with the guaranteed star power of Jane Russell, who would cost $200,000. Though he wasn't musically inclined himself, Hawks had a genuine appreciation for music, and often incorporated group singing scenes in his films. Yet when it came to directing the musical sequences in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, Hawks stepped back. He left the task to Jack Cole, a renowned choreographer known for his work with Rita Hayworth. Cole, described as intense and somewhat shy, guided Monroe through her performance in this and several other films, acting as a mentor and confidant. Cole's initial vision for Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend featured Monroe in a daring ensemble. Cole set up a rehearsal of Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend with Monroe on a black and pink Empire-style bed, clad exclusively with diamonds and displaying a small horse's tail emerging from her ass, topped with a tiny diamond horsefly on the tail. Unsurprisingly, this was deemed a tad too risque for the final scene composition. Daryl F. Zanuck had serious doubts about Monroe's vocal talent, and so he demanded a personal audition. But Monroe spectacularly proved her singing abilities, performing most of her songs in the movie herself. Hawks experienced communication difficulties with Monroe, frustrating him as she did not meet his expectations of professionalism. Monroe's notorious tardiness, insecure behavior, and dependence on acting coaches tested several directors, including Hawks. However, Zanuck's early approval of Monroe's performance and the studio's support helped mitigate the challenges posed by her behavior. As the film's release approached, the studio's promotional efforts intensified, culminating in Monroe and Russell's iconic cement imprint ceremony at Grauman's Chinese Theater, with full décolletage on display. This set the stage for Gentlemen Prefer Blondes to become one of Hawks' most significant box office successes. Next, Hawks was once again smitten with a younger woman, Dee Hartford, who captured Hawks' attention and eventually married him. She brought a far more challenging dynamic to their relationship. Unlike his previous partners, Hartford was outspoken and didn't hesitate to question Hawks, which invigorated him. Despite mixed feelings among Hawks' friends and family regarding the marriage, the couple celebrated their union and subsequently enjoyed an extended honeymoon in Paris. And in Paris, he was welcomed with open arms. Still vastly underappreciated in his homeland, he had failed to even make the most recent edition of Who's Who. The French hailed Hawks as a great artist. Jacques Rivette wrote about the genius of Hawks in that spring's edition of the almighty French movie magazine, Cahiers de Cinéma. In 1955, Hawks ventured into a genre quite different from his usual fare, with Land of the Pharaohs, a grand spectacle set in ancient Egypt, starring Jack Hawkins and Joan Collins. The film was also Hawks' last project with his old friend William Faulkner. Hawks ambitiously aimed to create a Cecil B. DeMille-style epic, a big departure from his comfort zone. Hawks' strength lay in crafting scenes rich in dialogue and human interactions, elements missing in this historical epic, which had a lukewarm reception. Hawks' loathing of High Noon, a celebrated Western by Fred Zinnemann and Carl Foreman, inspired his next project, Rio Bravo. Hawks sought to invert the elements he hated in High Noon in Rio Bravo. This was a strategy that resonated with John Wayne, who also had grievances with High Noon. The collaboration between old friends Hawks and Wayne, after years apart, was a big bonus for both. Dean Martin's casting in Rio Bravo also proved to be a wise choice, as Hawks recognized Martin's commitment beneath his laid-back demeanor. Upon its release, Rio Bravo wasn't seen as a significant artistic endeavor, largely because Westerns, even those directed by luminaries like John Ford and starring John Wayne, were often underappreciated by critics who favored films with more overtly ambitious themes. The inclusion of Dean Martin and Ricky Nelson further positioned Rio Bravo as mainstream entertainment, rather than highbrow art. Hawks' post-war filmography, which included a variety of genres, without venturing into what was considered challenging or prestigious content, contributed to his being overlooked by the critical establishment of the time. This underestimation of Hawks' contributions to cinema led to a reevaluation of his work in the 1960s by critics and film enthusiasts, who began to appreciate the depth and versatility of his directorial work. Jean-Luc Godard described Rio Bravo as a work of extraordinary psychological insight and aesthetic perception, and went on to declare Hawks as the greatest American artist in any field. High praise indeed. Today, Rio Bravo is celebrated by contemporary filmmakers and critics as one of the pinnacle achievements in cinema. Meanwhile, Hawks' personal life was undergoing many changes. Post the birth of his child Greg, Hawks' already modest sexual interest dwindled further, leading to strains in his marriage with Dee, who was not ready to spend her prime years in a passionless relationship. By 1958, the marriage was clearly struggling, leading to their separation in September 1959, and Dee soon filed for divorce, citing emotional and physical distress. So during Christmas 1959, Hawks reached out to Chance de Widstead, expressing his long-held thoughts about her. The Gray Fox wasn't wasting time. He proposed marriage despite their acquaintance being somewhat casual and platonic. Surprised by the proposal, Chance decided to explore the potential of their relationship by moving to Los Angeles to be with Hawks, albeit in separate bedrooms, as always. In 1962, Hawks directed Hatari, featuring John Wayne as an adventurous animal catcher in Africa. Wayne found the film to be an exceptionally fun project, despite the real dangers involved in the action sequences, which left him genuinely fearful for his safety. Paramount's seemingly extensive promotional efforts for Hatari did not please Hawks. Hawks felt compelled to personally intervene to ensure the film received the attention he believed it deserved. Meanwhile, the Museum of Modern Art in New York honored Hawks with a retrospective of his work, curated by Peter Bogdanovich. This was the beginning of a newfound appreciation for Hawks's contributions to cinema in the United States. This recognition laid the groundwork for what would become a cult following for Hawks. His status among film enthusiasts and critics was growing. They began to regard him as a director of the same caliber as Ingmar Bergman. The debate over Howard Hawks' status as an artist intensified as he released his final movies. Passionate arguments among critics, studio bosses, and fans alike began to swirl around his name, and much to his pleasure. In 1964, Hawks ventured into comedy one last time, with Man's Favorite Sport, casting Rock Hudson in a role initially considered for Cary Grant, who deemed himself too old for the part. Hawks found himself exasperated by studio interference, feeling it compromised the film's quality. Despite regarding it as a competent comedy, Hawks saw it as a missed opportunity. His next project, Red Line 7000 in 1965, jumped back into the world of car racing, starring a then novice James Caan. The film's production was hampered by the very inexperienced cast and their burgeoning egos. This meant departing from Hawks' usual collaborative process. The premiere turned into a debacle, with the audience laughing derisively, and much to the dismay of Hawks and Caan. The film received some positive attention, including later praise from Quentin Tarantino. El Dorado, directed by Hawks in 1966, and featuring John Wayne, Robert Mitchum, and Caan, followed. This film, released a year later, managed to recapture some of Hawks' earlier success. However, Hawks' final film, Rio Lobo, in 1970, starring Wayne, didn't live up to expectations. It was widely regarded as a lackluster end to the collaborations between Hawks and Wayne. The film's shortcomings were evident, marked by a lack of vitality and uninspired dialogue, a far cry from the dynamic exchanges that were characteristic of Hawks' earlier work. Howard Hawks' evolution into a cinematic icon began in France during the 1950s and gained momentum in the 1960s, but it fully blossomed in the 70s. Hawks' awareness of his growing reputation is uncertain, but he embraced his role as a mentor, readily sharing insights from his extensive career in numerous interviews. He was accessible to both fans and aspiring filmmakers, often inviting them to his home for conversations. Peter Bogdanovich was notably one of the first to seek Hawks' guidance, incorporating Hawks' work into his own films as a tribute. In October 1972, Hawks was honored at the San Francisco Film Festival, alongside Raoul Walsh and Rita Hayworth. While Hawks and Walsh shared a cordial relationship, Hayworth, whom Hawks hadn't seen in years, made an unfortunate impression due to her worse-for-wear condition at the event's social gatherings. She was described as being fall-down drunk by some observers. Hawks maintained his formidable presence, always accessible yet imposing to those who met him. He looked youthful, tanned, tall, immaculately dressed, and now often sporting a pair of aviator sunglasses to complete the authoritarian look. On April 8, 1975, as The Godfather Part 2 dominated the Oscars, John Wayne presented Hawks with an honorary Oscar. Finally, the Academy had recognized his enduring impact on film. Despite nearing 80, Hawks was contemplating new projects, including an adventure movie about oil rigging. His ambitions, however, were cut short by his health. Hawks' final significant public outing was in October 1977 at a Directors Guild of America event in Laguna Beach dedicated to his work, where he appeared in great form. Tragically, just months later, Hawks experienced a severe fall at home, leading to hospitalization. He had tripped over his dog Raven, sustaining injuries that left him incapacitated, until friends discovered him the following day. His hospital stay revealed a more vulnerable side. He looked old at last, and hated being treated as though he were. After insisting on returning home, Hawks spent his final days reflecting on his life and openly expressing love to his daughter Barbara, something he had seldom done before. He passed away the day after Christmas in 1977, with his children by his side. Fulfilling his final wishes, Hawks' ashes were scattered over the desert, and this was the final legacy of a filmmaker who had tremendously shaped Hollywood's golden era. That concludes this episode of Hollywood Mysteries. If you would like more rainy tales from the dark side of Tinseltown, feel free to subscribe to the channel. Until next time, it's a good night from Hollywood Mysteries. Sweet dreams.